Well, good morning. Good morning. It's good to see you all and everyone joining us online as well. So we're starting this new series that is outward facing. And when you think about outward facing, just think about like our relational posture, how we see and view people. And to start off with this, I want to look at something that I just absolutely love about Jesus Christ, and that I think you probably love as well. But I want us to just look at some different passages here, and you'll see how this begins to unfold. So first passage I'm going to look at is found in John chapter 5. And we'll put the verses on the screen if you don't have your Bible or a phone or laptop or whatever. But let me give you the backdrop on the story of what's happening here. Is Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he's near what is called the Sheep Gate. And this would have been a really busy place. Picture a lot of people coming in and out of the city. Gates like this were also a place of commerce, and so there'd be a lot of people there. A lot of city business were done at the gates. So just lots and lots of people. And in particular, this one, there was this pool nearby where people would hang out. So got the picture, all of these people. And Jesus is there with his disciples. And it says this starting in verse 5. It says, one who was there had been an invalid for about 38 years and probably just off to the side next to this pool. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked, "Do you want to get well?" And then the story goes on, and it becomes this amazing story as Jesus heals him, and there's all this stuff that's going on. But this morning, I just want to draw your attention to maybe a part of it that we often miss, and it's just this beginning setup part where it's, first of all, there's this massive crowd, and Jesus notices this guy, and I love these words, and it says, and learned that he had been there. There was something that he learned about this, and this is this idea of this outward facing. Jesus, it's like he's noticing, he's looking, he sees this guy, and there's some curiosity, there's some wonder, there's some care. He learns about this guy. And we don't know if it was because like he, was asking some of his friends or asking around, or like he's Jesus. Maybe he just, downloaded something about the, I don't know. I don't know how that works. But what I love is that the text is showing us, he notices, he's curious, he seeks to understand this person. See, that's outward facing, to seek to understand that other person. You see this when Jesus has a couple of these interactions with children. Matthew talks about this, and Mark talks about this. Maybe different moments, maybe the same moment, but Jesus is ministering, and it's this probably a very busy time, and he's interacting with all these people going through this stuff, and there's more people showing up. There's some parents who show up with their kids because they want their kids to see Jesus. And of course, the disciples are like, we got some important stuff going on here. Like the kids can wait, or pushing the kids off. And it's like Jesus notices, he's outward facing, and he sees what's happening. And of course, he's like, whoa, wait a minute. No, they count too. Bring those kids over. And this is never lost on Jesus in this way. One more example. And again, this is one of those examples where everything is like really, really crowded. This is in the temple area. This is found in Mark chapter 12, if you want to look at it as well. And Jesus has been teaching all morning long to different groups. And you can imagine that he is tired and exhausted. There's a lot that's been going on, and they stop for some sort of break. Maybe it's like a lunch break, and they find this place to sit down somewhere in the temple area. And this is where we pick this up in Mark 12, verse 41. And it says this: Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. So you just picture this moment where Jesus sits down, but now he's watching the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Now watch this, verse 43. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. So picture this moment, right? Jesus, he's been teaching and there's a crowd and they're moving in and doing all this stuff. And it's like he sits down somewhere in the temple area and he's watching across. It may have been a long ways across where he's watching people. He's noticing because he's outward facing. And then he watches this woman, this widow, put just these 2 little coins in there. And I love this moment because he's like, okay, guys, like he's getting his disciples. Did you see that? Did you watch that? I'm telling you, that woman, and here's what he's letting them know, because he's being a rabbi. He is modeling something for him. I noticed this woman because she matters. Do you see? Like, I love this about Jesus. The way people mattered to him, the way he was outward facing and he's curious and observant and he sees these things because people matter. And I use the examples of the children and the widow in particular because so often, especially in this culture, from a cultural standpoint, they were the ones that could most easily go unnoticed. They were the ones that culturally didn't matter, right? They were the ones that, like, we don't go around pointing them out, and yet Jesus constantly seeing and noticing those folks. And I love this about Jesus. And I think it's one of the things that you love about Jesus. Like, let me ask you this question. Do you remember a moment, maybe the first moment you ever experienced the sensation or the thought that you mattered to Jesus, or that Jesus noticed you in a really difficult moment? I want you to think about that for just a second. Maybe it was a moment of hardship, right? Maybe it was a moment of pain. You remember what it was like when all of a sudden you're just like, man, I feel seen by the God of the universe. He looked all the way across from where he was and he gets me, he sees me. Or maybe it was a moment of great decision or you were processing something intellectually. Maybe it was a struggle or a doubt or a difficult choice you had to make, and you felt all alone in that choice, and you were stepping out, and all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, and you experienced a moment. God's with me in this. Jesus sees me. See, this is why we love Jesus so much, right? This is one of those beautiful things about this. But also understand that this outward facing notion of who Jesus is also has a difficult part to it that sometimes we miss, but we feel it, we experience it. Because think about the disciples, right? As Jesus is saying, I don't want you to miss that widow over there. What he's saying to them is, I want you to be putting some focus in your own hearts and your own minds, not on who? You, but I want you to be outward focused. Means sometimes we're not looking to ourselves, or we focus on someone else out there, and that can be difficult. Years ago, as we were working on this as a church, I remember preaching some sermons about this and talking about like changes that we were making at the church and thinking about the person who isn't here yet. And let's think about helping them the very first time they are here, even before they get here. And we started thinking about what would it be like to be more outward facing and think about those people as they come in. And I remember having a meeting with a guy who set up a meeting with me because he was just frustrated with it. He was just struggling with some of the changes that we were making. We met in my office, and wonderful guy. But I remember him going through this process as he was, because he got it. He's just like, I see the focus on it. And he said, but here's my frustration. He said, all week long, I'm out there. All week long, like I go through these difficult things and these moments, and it just feels like that world is for, everyone and me and everything. And he says, and I'll never forget, we were sitting in my office and he was sitting down across from me, and I remember his head and his posture, because at one point, he just dropped his head and he just said, why can't we be a place where when I come on a Sunday, I can be poured into, right? Why do we have to worry about being outward facing when I come in and this is my one shot a week to come and have people minister to me. And I remember just how he dropped his head and it's just like, I've got these hurts and these wants and these struggles, and why can't this be a place for me? And I get that. I really do. And maybe you get that as well, that there are moments where you feel this thing, because it feels like sometimes to be outward facing, do we lose something that I'm gonna need? Because there's this beautiful thing that we have experienced here. And the reality is, and I wanna be careful how I talk about him, because I know this is a struggle that we are all gonna have at different moments. And it's something I've experienced at moments. I remember a moment early on in my ministry. I was working at another church in Chicago, and we had just started an initiative to create a bunch of these small groups that were primarily focused on helping brand new people get connected into the church, because we had all of these people that really weren't connected very deeply into the church, and we didn't even hardly know who they were, and we were trying to make these small groups. And I was working with my boss on this, and we had multiple pastors working on this, and I was starting a number of these young married groups at that time. And one of the things that we talked about with these groups was, we said, now when we start these groups, as a symbolic understanding of what this group is serving to do and help to do, is we're gonna put a chair in the room that's gonna remain empty. And we called it the open chair. And it was just to remind us, right? To remind us that there's someone that could be here that needs this, that isn't here yet. And it just to keep us in that kind of outward facing posture. And I remember we talked about this. And so I started a number of these different groups. And then I started one that Angie and I were actually a part of, right? So this was kind of like our group. And there was another couple that had been a part of this church for a long time, and I'd kind of gotten to know them. I said, hey, let's start this group. And so we did. And then we invited some other couples in, and we invited a few more couples in, and the group started to grow, and it was really wonderful. And I remember there being a moment where it's like, okay, I have moved from Tucson, Arizona as this young married guy, and now I've gone to Chicago where I didn't know anybody. And all of a sudden now I've got this group of other young marrieds. I'm digging this. I didn't realize how much I wanted that and needed that. And then I had it. And then a weird thing kind of happened. I think it was subconscious at first, and then it became conscious. Because I was a pastor working in that area, as names would come in and stuff, I'm trying to, pass them off to different groups that we have. And I was just not passing any of those names off to my group. I just, we had the open chair and everything. It kind of became a nice place to, put your backpack or your purses or, when you were meeting. It just was very handy. And it lost a little bit of the symbolism of like, okay, who's the person we could invite into our group? Who's the couple that doesn't have what we now have? And because we now have it and feel the beauty of it, like let's give that away, right? I just stopped doing that a little bit. And I remember my boss at the time was asking me about the different groups and how they were going, and I was explaining it to him. His name was Jim. And so he asked me, he came kind of circled back around to my group, and he's just like, if you had, who have you invited to your group, or who? And I said, well, I started explaining to him, we're kind of getting large, and he goes, well, maybe it's time to split the group, And I'm like, well, that could wreck the group, I don't want that. And he's like, well, you could fit some other people in. And I was thinking but I like it the way it is. If we brought in another couple, what if they wreck the group, right? And it's just and that chair's very handy for your backpack, right? And he challenged me on it. As a leader, there's something you're modeling here to the other volunteer leaders that you're leading. And he made a really good point. I was like, but I'm grateful that he did that, because it brought me back to this thing of okay, am I being outward facing in all of this, right? And it was that realization that the thing that we are trying to do is really important. And I remember it kind of went from being, okay, part of my job is to grow these groups and get people into these groups, to really seeing and maybe getting in touch with, but there's also a part of me, for as much as I want this for me, I have a heart to want this for some other people I don't even know yet, but I know they're out there. And I want that for them. And don't get me wrong, and this is important. We need people in places where we belong. We need that. And there is a place for small groups that aren't open. There's a place for relationships that are more intimate or close, or like, I'm not saying that should never be the place, but there's this outward facing posture that is a little bit different. And we can't lose what it means to be outward facing, because the church is Jesus's vehicle for advancing his mission. And we're the church. See, like there's a part of this that we're the church that have taken on the mission of this invitation of inviting people to be able to sit in that seat, to experience this beautiful, precious thing that Jesus has, right? Jesus saw his whole life as like he had this precious gift to give away that he wanted to give away. This gets captured really, really well in one of the parables that Jesus teaches. And it helps us see ourselves, I think, in a little bit different way, because here's what I don't want us to think of. I don't want you to think of the church as a gathering of people who don't have everything they need, right? And sometimes we feel that. Sometimes, man, like my friend who came in and sat in my office, and I watched his head drop, and it just kind of came focused in. He was showing up every Sunday, and it's just like, I don't know that I have enough for everything that I need. What I want us to see here, and we're gonna see this in this parable, what if there's the flip side of this? What if the flip side of it is, because we have a chair at Jesus's table, we actually, even though we go through difficult times and live in a difficult world, we have so much. We could give everything away and still have enough acceptance and enough love and enough freedom and enough care and enough grace, and like to begin thinking that way in this. And this is what Jesus does with this parable. So this parable that I want to walk us through here is found in Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14. And let me set this up, because I think if we understand part of what's happening with this parable, it helps us with this idea of being outward facing. So Jesus begins to share this parable, and the parable that represents this idea of God's kingdom, life in relationship with God's kingdom, begins with this landowner, this master, who throws this huge banquet. And we don't know what the banquet is for, but it's this extravagant banquet. And here's how this would have worked back in this culture. Typically, 2 invitations would have gone out. First, there's an invitation for everyone to put it on their calendar. Not an exact date or time, but like, this is what's coming up, right? When the crops are all in, when these things get pulled together, when everything gets pulled together for this banquet, you know, in the next month, 2 months, or whenever it's gonna be, there's gonna be this huge banquet. And then a second invitation goes out when it's actually time to come to the banquet, like when it's the day before or the week of, or however it would work. Then this second invitation goes out. So the parable has this thing where this landowner, he sends out this invitation, and all the people that would be the typical people that you would think of that would be invited, they're invited, and they say yes. Then the second invitation goes out. It's time to come to the banquet. And all those normal people that would have come to the banquet all opt out. They've got all these kind of funny or weird excuses. And this is where we pick this up. And all of a sudden we get to see this new kind of picture of what's happening here. So the servants have gone out with the second invitation. Everyone's like, well, I can't make it. I've got this happening or that happening. Here's where we pick this up. This is in Luke chapter 14, verse 21. And it says this: the servant came back and reported this to the master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the towns and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And like two things that jump out right away. One, he's like all the people that you would think wouldn't come to a banquet like this. He's like, they need to know. Invite them, pull them in. But here's what I love even more. This servant knows the heart of his master, okay? Look at the next verse here, verse 22. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done. Right? Because I knew like you would want those people invited to this thing. And so we already did that. Right? This is the kind of guy that you are. What you ordered has been done, but there is still room. Then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. Okay? And so there's just two things. There's a lot of things we could glean from this parable, but just from this part of the parable that we've looked at here, there's two things that I just want to pull out and talk about a little bit here this morning. And the first one is this. Jesus's mission isn't just for me. It's for everyone. It's for you and you and you and you. It's for everyone. Because this is his heart, right? I love the owner of this house. It says he's like, his immediate response is, are there people who don't know that they're invited? Because there are people out there that might think, well, because of my social status, because of something about me spiritually, because of an injury, because I'm lame, because like whatever, like all of the different excuses. And it's just like, they need to know there is a seat for them in my house. My banquet has a place for them. You see this all over the place with Jesus' teaching. In fact, maybe the most famous verse of all, right, that everybody knows. In fact, I saw the reference to this verse in a football game just 2 Sundays ago. And it's like it disappeared for a few years, right? It was always in the end zone. And there it was again. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been forever since I've seen that, right? John 3:16, right? And when you think about that verse, right, it starts off, and God so loved the smart people that God so loved the moral people, the religious people, What? God so loved what? The world. The world. Everybody. Because that's the owner's heart. That he wants a seat for everyone in this. And I say this, and I know there's this thing that when we think about this, like, okay, I want to be outward facing. And sometimes we think of someone, maybe, and I'm gonna just ask you this right now. Is there someone in your life and you're like, man, if only they knew Christ the way I know Christ. I long for that. But there's no way they're gonna do that. They're jaded. Do you have someone in your life and you're just like, man, it breaks my heart to think that they would avoid church, they would avoid a relationship with Christ at all costs because ... They had a bad experience with the church. They just had a bad experience. They just got hurt in life. And they now think there's no way God cares about me. And even if God is real, God can't be that, and ... And here's what I would say is, don't write them off. Don't give up, because Jesus is saying there's a chair for everyone. Maybe a way to think about this is, I know and believe that maybe there's a good majority of us in this room that if we thought back to a certain point in our life when we weren't going to church, or when we went to church by force, or when we didn't believe in God, or when we ... And if I would have asked you back then, hey, what do you think the chances are of you coming to church anytime soon? You'd be like, not a chance. There's no way. And here you are. Because somewhere, God got an invitation deep enough in your heart that you realized there was a chair for you. And you realized there was something beautiful and precious for you. And what I want us to remember is to be outward facing says, there's a spot for everyone. I don't give up on anyone. Like I may not understand it. It may seem like a long shot, but like some of us, we're long shots, right? And here you are. Don't give up hope, because there's a place for everyone in this. Next thing is, and I love this, Jesus's mission isn't just for me, it's by me. And it's by you, and it's by you, and it's by you. And here's what I mean by this. What doesn't happen in this parable is the servant comes back and says, man, we sent out all the invitations, and then they came back and no, and I know you wanted to send us, make sure we sent invitations to everybody, even the people that wouldn't expect it. And we've sent those invitations out. And then, right, the landowner said, stay right here, right? Keep the crock pot warm. I'm going out right now. And then he runs out and he's going down every country lane and he's pulling people in and he's like, no. What happens in this? He's like, I want you to go out, because here's the thing, right? Jesus's mission is moved forward by the church, and we're the church. He says to them, like, I want you to go out and send that invitation. It's a little bit like this. It's like he's saying, I want you to go and get another chair and pull it in here. And I want you to go and make sure that you're pulling up a chair for that next person in this whole thing. And I think sometimes we think about this in a way where it's like, okay, I've got my chair, right? Okay, and let's see, God, you go get someone and you'll pull up a chair and bring them in here. But the reality is, what he's saying is, when you have a chair and you see the beauty and the preciousness of what you have with Christ, you now get to make sure you pull up a chair and invite somebody else to sit in that chair. That's what I love about this. Okay, now, some of you are going, I don't love that. That sounds like, I don't know. What, like, okay? And I get that too. Because there's a part of this where maybe you're going, Glenn, I don't know the Bible well enough to be a chair puller-upper kind of person, right? Some of you are going, Glenn, oh man, my life is a mess. I don't think God wants me pulling up chairs for other people because I'm a mess, right? If you knew the truth of my life, right? I just show up here every Sunday with a heavy heart. And I'm just looking to touch back into that grace, back into that forgiveness, right? But God wouldn't want me to do this. And what I want to say is, you're exactly the kind of person God is saying. You're more than qualified to pull up a chair for someone else. There's no qualifications of how well you know the Bible or how perfect your life is or isn't in this. The fact that you have said, I'm so grateful I have a chair in God's kingdom, qualifies you. That's it. Now, you may still be going, okay, but Glenn, that's still not my cup of tea, because here's how we often think of what it means to be the kind of person to pull up a chair for someone else. And it's this, I have to convince them, right? Or I have to convict them to get this. And here's what I would say is, it's not about convincing or convicting people that's sitting in that chair. In fact, I'll go back to, how did you become a follower of Christ? And I get right now in this moment, maybe not everyone here in this room is a follower of Christ, and that's absolutely okay. But those of you who are, I'd be willing to bet that the way you came to find that you had a chair wasn't because you got into this intellectual discussion or argument with someone and then they turned a corner and they just had these Socratic moments where they asked you the right intellectual question and then we're like, boom, mic drop. And you're like, oh, I don't have an answer to that. Okay, I guess I'll become a Christian. Right? It probably didn't happen that way. There was probably a kind of journey that you were on. And I bet part of that journey, there may have been an intellectual side to it, but it wasn't because there was someone that was so vastly skilled in intellectual skills that talked you into becoming a Christian. It wasn't because they just overwhelmingly convinced you in that. And there's this side of it where sometimes we feel like, okay, but what about like the conviction side? Like, if someone's gonna become a Christian, they've gotta know how bad their sin is, and they just so that they really feel scared, and then they'll jump into that chair because of what's going. But let me ask you, right? And I get that there may be a number of you that you're just like, yeah, Glenn, I went to a church where it terrified me, and that's why I became a Christian. But I bet there are a bunch of you that actually pushed you away. And those of you who became a Christian, out of fear, out of something that pulled you in that way, I'd be willing to bet that you came to a crisis point somewhere later in your life where you had to discover and see God as something richer and more beautiful and precious than the thing that you feared, that kept you in a place of staying and trusting him in that chair, in this, right? You don't have to do that or be that. And yet so often that is the place we end up. We feel like I've got to convince someone or convict somebody of something. I came across this. I was driving to Phoenix one afternoon, and I went kind of the back way through up 77 Florence, and got to Florence and needed to get some gas, so got some gas, and I was hungry, and I think it was a McDonald's. So I went in the McDonald's, decided to just sit in there, and I'm eating my lunch, and there's this guy that was going around to all the tables with people, and at first I thought it was an employee, and then he came over to my table, and I realized he was not an employee, because the first question he asked me was, would you like $1 million? Yeah, that's exactly right. I was just like, so I'm suspicious, but I'll go along with it. Sure. And he goes, here you go. And he handed me this. And it says $1 million on the front. I still didn't believe it was worth $1 million, and it wasn't. And he was so excited that I took his $1 million bill, and he's like, okay, flip it over and read the other side. So then I flipped it over to read the other side. Let me just read you part of what it says on the other side here. He says, the $1 million question, and it's in real fine print. $1 million is real big, but when you look real close, there's all of this fine print, and you have to go around the edges to read it. So here's part of what it says. It says, the $1 million question, will you go to heaven? Here's a quick test. It's convenient how they've worked all of this together. Have you ever told a lie, stolen something, or used God's name in vain? Jesus says, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Have you looked with lust? And it's just like, whew, man, it's getting kind of nosy on the questions here. Will you be guilty on judgment day? If you have done those things, God sees you, and this is where I was like, whew, okay? God sees you as a thieving, blasphemous, adulterer at heart. And the Bible warns if you're guilty, you will end up in hell. Now, at that point, I was like, and he's smiling and he's so excited that I'm reading through this whole thing. And I didn't have the heart to tell him, it's not working and I'm already on your side. It's just you're pushing me away, right, in this moment. Because at the end of the day, Jesus didn't scare people into heaven. That wasn't his process. That's not what he modeled for us, right? And so the thing that he's not expecting of you or me is to convict people into a chair. That's not his point. And he's not expecting you and I to intellectually, structure something in some way that forces them in that chair, right? And I think this is where sometimes we think, okay, all right, I'll do the right thing. Here's a chair from Jesus for you. Sit there, right? That's not what it is. The place I would love you to think about this is start with the chair you're sitting in. Start with the beautiful thing that you have. And understand there's gonna be moments where we're gonna feel this, where it's just gonna feel like, God, man, Jesus, like I just wanna be a part of my church and have it pour into me. And I understand that, and that's okay. But the thing that Jesus is calling us to is to look up. And this is what it means to be outward facing. It's a willingness to say, let me pull up a chair and just be with you. This is what Jesus modeled. It is to be with, it is to care. It's to be outward facing and saying like, okay, what's going on in your life in this? I'll never forget, years ago, I had a friend, Jeff, who wanted to introduce me to one of his friends, and he set up a coffee and we got together. And the whole reason Jeff wanted to do this was a guy that he knew, and this guy loved to ride dirt bikes. And at that time, I still love to ride dirt bikes. It just doesn't happen very often. We were kind of both into dirt bikes a little bit, and this guy actually had a track where he lived. He was a doctor. And so we got to talking about dirt bikes and everything. And then very quickly as we started to talk, I started to realize, and he didn't know I was a pastor yet, we started to talk and realized his wife had recently died. And he was really feeling jaded about this whole thing. Didn't understand why God would allow this. He was struggling to raise two kids that were just entering their teen years. And for him, like this spiritual journey that he had started a while back with the death of his wife, it was like it was over. He felt like churches were filled with empty promises and everything else. And then as we got partway through this thing, I was like, okay, now I know what my friend Jeff is doing, right? And so I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna pull up a chair and just spend some time with this guy. And as we got onto some spiritual conversations, man, he gave me the stiff arm. Like I just thought, like there's no opening at all in this. And we would get together and we rode dirt bikes and we talked about stuff, and most often spiritual conversations just got pushed to the side. One afternoon, we were gonna go ride dirt bikes, and he called me up and he said, hey, let's go get coffee instead. And I was like, I want to ride dirt bikes. And I'm a little slow sometimes to listening to the Holy Spirit, but it's like, okay, we can go get coffee, right? We go to get coffee. And it wasn't the first words out of his mouth, but I bet by the second or third sentence, he said, Glenn, do we pray to do this thing? I want to follow Jesus. And I'll pray right here in the coffee shop. And I remember and so we did. And I said, where's because I didn't understand how this happened, right? And he just said, I kept demanding these answers from God about all of these things. And you know what? Not one of his intellectual answers got answered. And he had strong intellectual questions that he was asking. He was a very cerebral kind of guy, and he had all these questions. And he said, you and Jeff just got me to see how much God cares for me, because the way you have cared for me. And it's like, that's it? And that was. So friends, here, when we talk about being a church that's an outward facing church, all I want you to get in this is when you see yourself going to this, remember what you have in your seat so that you can lift your head and go to this. That's all an outward facing church is. I'm gonna close this in prayer here in a moment, but before I do, I just wanna say this, right? If you're here this morning and you're brand new, right? And maybe it's your first time to a church in a long time, you are so welcome here. And if you have any questions, you come and see me or anyone around here. We'd love to answer any of your questions. And if you're new here or just visiting, I'd love to just personally welcome you here. And I'll be over here. Or if you want to get more deeply connected into this church and have some questions about how to do that, come and find me or someone over at these high top tables right over here, or prayer. If you're just hurting this morning, want someone to pray for you, in our prayer place, we have some wonderful, kind, grace-filled people that would love to pray with you or for you this morning. Why don't you stand, and I'm gonna close this in prayer. Let me pray. Father, we just thank you for the example of your son, Jesus Christ, just the way he was always facing outward and seeing people and curious about them and cared about them. And I just pray on behalf of this whole church that you keep pulling our posture back to being that outward facing church that's just emulating the one that we follow. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.